Okay. How's everyone doing? All right. We're going to talk a little DevOps. All right. I'd like to introduce Steve Farley. Steve's going to talk about DevOps at Nationwide, focus on continuous delivery and reduced variance. Steve is the Vice President of the App Dev Center at Nationwide Insurance. He has over 30 years of information technology with a focus on development operations and resulting value for business partners. In his current role as the Vice President of Nationwide Development Center, he leads a team of software development professionals with a focus on delivery effectiveness through Agile adoption, practice adoption, lean concepts, and a culture of continuous improvement. The App Dev Center currently consists of over 50 development lines, is one of the first enterprise-scale Agile organizations to achieve CMMI Level 3. So with that, let's turn it over to Steve.
Thanks, Ken. I think I'm on. You're on. All right, we have this thing rolling here so I can see it.
Sure.
Yes. Can you get full screen?
It's
All right, I just want to make sure I can see it over there. All right, well, welcome, guys. I know it's after lunch. Ben threw me for a loop, so this is nice small crowd. So he told me I was going to be in this little room over there, and then I showed up, and I'm like, what are you doing to me? So it's good that we have a nice, close-knit group here. But anyway, I'm going to try to intrigue you a little bit today around what is this word DevOps, and what does it really mean? And how does it play against Agile, considering this is the Path to Agility conference? And what is Nationwide doing around the word DevOps, and where have we come in relation to Agile and other concepts like Lean? So we'll talk a little bit about that journey, and hopefully you'll take a few things away back to your companies and ask a few questions. But first, I do like to provide context of who Nationwide is, not because I'm proud of it, which I am, but more importantly because of the importance of IT. So if you look at what we do, we're a Fortune 91 company, insurance company of both insurance and financial products. So you can see up there on the board, we have 10.9 billion in standard auto and non-standard auto. We've got 7.7 billion in commercial and 20.8 billion in financial services products that we support. So IT is at the heart of everything we do. And products are emerging faster than ever. Capability on the internet for insurance company and financial services companies are coming at us faster and faster. So we in IT need to be able to support that and be creative and inventive. And I think that's where DevOps really comes into play. If you think about the size of IT at Nationwide, we're trying to corral these concepts for 8,000 IT professionals. So we run about $1 billion IT organization that's made up of about 8,000 IT professionals. We run 105 Agile teams, and we'll talk words like Lean and Agile together with DevOps. We run 105 Agile teams across the enterprise. We deliver out of 5 different locations, and basically we deliver on 800 different projects. So I'll talk a little bit about that project concept as we get into the DevOps discussion. All right, so why DevOps? What is this word? So how many people out there are really in tune with what's happening with DevOps? Paid a lot of attention to it. So, it's the buzz right now. And if you were to look at statistics and say, what's getting more hits on the internet with our search engines, it's DevOps is getting a lot more hits than Agile today. So Agile, has been around for a long time, and many of us embrace that, but now we're embarking on this word called DevOps. And basically, here's why DevOps exists, because 60% of production failures are caused by human error. 51% of business leaders expect projects to be delivered within 6 months. 70% actually miss the mark on that. 40% also said it takes more than a year for IT departments to produce solutions and innovate. So we'll talk about the deployment side of that and how do you get to rapid deployment to innovate and get things on the street quickly. All right, next up here, I've got some reference material for you. The State of DevOps is a report that was produced by Puppet Labs. Whoa, I'm going to lose this iced tea. But Puppet Labs and ThoughtWorks partnership, and they surveyed a lot of companies, and here's 9,200 companies, and here's the report. And they came back and said, what is the state of DevOps out there in the industry? So you'll see DevOps adoption is accelerating, high-performing IT organizations are more agile and more reliable, deploying code 30 times faster. So again, back to that deployment aspect of DevOps, it says we want to be faster at the way we deploy and get things to market quicker. And I'm going to put this here. All right, at this point I want to pause and play a video. How many people know the history of the Agile Manifesto? Anybody? When it was written, how it was, where it was comes from? Probably a lot of people. If you're at Path to Agility, a lot of people know that. How many people know the evolution of the word DevOps and where it came from? So a few. So I'm going to play, because we have an hour here, I'm going to play a 10-minute video, and I want you to learn a little bit about what this evolution looked like. So why don't you guys go ahead and tee up the video.
Between my work with DTO Solutions or writing with the IT Revolution Press, I get to talk to a lot of folks who are interested in DevOps. These conversations have reminded me that while there's a lot already out there about what DevOps is or what DevOps isn't, there really isn't much about where DevOps came from or how the DevOps movement actually got started. So I've told these stories enough times that I decided to go ahead and record it. So without further ado, here it is. The short history of DevOps, or well, at least how I think I saw it happening. Our story begins in Belgium back in 2007. There we find a guy named Patrick Dubois. Now, Patrick had an interesting personal goal. Patrick wanted to learn IT from every possible angle. So as a consultant, Patrick had been picking his jobs based on the opportunity to work in every part of an IT organization. Now, Patrick had taken a project with the government ministry doing a large data center migration. So specifically for this project, he was in charge of the testing. So that meant he had to spend a lot of time straddling the various dev groups and the various ops groups. And this contrast between how dev works and how ops works had always been something that was very unsettling to Patrick, but it was really the constant switching and back and forth on this specific project that was particularly frustrating to him. On one day, he'd find himself deep in the rhythm of Agile development, and the next day he was firefighting and living the unpredictability of traditional operations. So, while Patrick knew there had to be a better way, these two worlds of dev and ops just seemed miles apart, and there were conflicts everywhere. Okay, so now let's jump forward to the Agile 2008 conference in Toronto, Canada. This guy here, Andrew Schaefer, he posts on the wall an idea for a birds of a feather or ad hoc session that he calls Agile infrastructure. And when the time for this session rolls around, only one person showed up. And yep, you guessed it, it was Patrick Dubois. And when I say only one person showed up, I literally mean only one person showed up. Even Andrew skipped his own session. You see, Andrew had gotten such poor feedback on his proposed topic that he just figured nobody would want to talk about how to bridge the gap between development and operations. But it was Patrick who actually was at the conference to give a presentation on using Scrum and other Agile practices within an operational context. Was so energized that someone else out there shared his frustration, he went and tracked down Andrew in the conference hallway. There they had a long discussion and realized that there had to be other people out there who wanted to talk about what seemed like such a widespread and systemic issue. Now, a bit of context. Within the broader Agile community, continuous integration had been gaining in popularity and was moving Agile more towards deployment, but there still wasn't much out there that fully crossed the divide into operations. So Andrew and Patrick decided to get together and form the Agile Systems Administration Group on Google. And it got some interesting conversations, but by any measure, the traffic remained pretty small. So now let's jump forward to 2009, specifically June 23rd, 2009, where John Allspaw and Paul Hammond, who were both at Flickr at the time, were giving their now famous talk at O'Reilly's Velocity Conference in San Jose. The talk was called 10 plus deploys per day, Dev and Ops cooperation at Flickr. So Patrick was back home in Belgium watching this via streaming video, and he recognized that that's it. That's exactly the goal and topics that he was so passionate about. So on Twitter, Patrick was lamenting how he wished he could have attended Velocity. But it was Paul Nasserat who tweeted back, "Hey Patrick, why don't you start your own Velocity in Belgium? That way we can all attend. Wouldn't that be great? Ha ha ha." Well, far from being a joke, the idea actually stuck in Patrick's head. So he soon put out a call on Twitter for a gathering to bring developers and systems administrators together in Ghent, Belgium on October 30th and 31st, 2009. So Patrick knew he needed a name for the event. It was obvious to him that he had to include dev, he had to include ops, and well, it was 2 days, so let's stick a days on there. And for some strange reason, even today when I asked him, he said he's not sure why, but he really liked the DoD acronym. It reminded him of Dead On Delivery, which I know, strange, go figure. But that was it. DevOps Days was the name, and DevOps Days it was. So now, we'll never know if it was the right moment in time, fortuitous travel schedules, or something else altogether, but this really impressive crowd of forward-thinking systems administrators, developers, managers, and toolsmiths, they came from all over the world to participate in DevOps days. Now, of course, soon after the event was over, everybody scattered and went back to their corners of the globe, but the conversation continued onward on Twitter. Now, it quickly became too cumbersome to use the full DevOps Days name as the hashtag for the conversation, as smaller hashtags would take up less of that valuable 140-character real estate on Twitter. So the days was dropped, and the DevOps hashtag really stuck. Now, speaking of the scattering, Lindsay Homewood liked the idea of DevOps Days so much that he took it back to Sydney, Australia with him, and held the first DevOps Days down under. Myself, Andrew Schaefer, John Willis, we got together, and with the help of Stefan Appitz and Daniel Francisco at LinkedIn, we held the first DevOps Days in the US immediately following the 2010 edition of Velocity. But in the meantime, something far more interesting was starting to happen. Sparked by the momentum of these early face-to-face meetings, this community of practitioners suddenly emerged from all over the world to share their experiences and debate ideas under this new DevOps banner. DevOps had become this lightning rod, for people who had something to say about how IT was or should be running. Presentations, meetups, sessions within other conferences, these all started happening all over the place. So, and really this was a continuation of this online momentum that was built behind this avalanche of tweets and blog posts where people were, sharing their experiences and learning from others. And I think when people went as far as to start making their own song parodies and music videos, it became pretty clear to folks that DevOps was tapping into a raw nerve. DevOps had become this full-fledged grassroots movement, something pretty rare in IT. Now, it was still being largely ignored by vendors, by analysts, by most traditional enterprise IT shops, but the movement was growing by being fed from the passions of these practitioners. These folks usually from web operations backgrounds who were largely meeting and writing about these topics on their own free time. It was in these conversations that people really commiserated about the cultural and functional deficiencies in the legacy tools that they had been saddled with. In response, the DevOps community started to drive a whole new generation of tools that formalized the best practices that they wanted. These tools had fun names like Puppet, Chef, Vagrant, Juju, Rundeck, Logstash, FPM. In fact, you can only guess what the F in FPM stands for. But these were serious tools, and in most cases, these tools were running circles around what the legacy tools could offer. For the community, these were artifacts that represented a better way of working and a way to formalize their thinking about new ideas and new processes. To outsiders, these were shiny new toys that made you jealous if you didn't have them and drew you into the conversation. But all around, the enthusiasm for these tools was an early and energizing force. So pretty soon, some of the more plugged-in analysts started to figure out, hey, there's something interesting brewing here, and maybe we should join the conversation. First in were folks like Michael COHAA at that point from RedMonk, Jay Lyman, who was with the 451 group. And after that came folks like Cameron Haight of Gartner. Now, Cameron's influence is interesting. It's subtle, but potentially a pivotal point for DevOps' relationship with the enterprise. Now, I can't definitively prove this assertion one way or the other, but the timing is definitely curious. In March 2011, Cameron slips the slide into a presentation, and it definitely sent a strong signal to enterprise IT shops and the vendors who service them. Something that was pretty much unheard of up to that point in the DevOps movement. So let's see what Cameron said. So he said, by 2015, DevOps will evolve from a niche strategy employed by large cloud providers into a mainstream strategy employed by 20% of global 2,000 organizations. Now, I don't know if you speak analyst, but that roughly translates to DevOps is real, check it out. So now some folks might see this and get kind of hung up on the 20% prediction, whether it's too bullish or it's too conservative. But nonetheless, that's really not the point. The point is there's a clear message here, which is DevOps is coming to the enterprise, go long on DevOps. Now, not long after that, I don't know whether this is by coincidence or not, but we started to see almost all the large vendors pick up on the word DevOps and start to really fold it into their messaging. Some have figured out how to use it quite nicely, while others, well, I guess you could say they missed the mark altogether. But nonetheless, DevOps was appearing all over the place, and that's a good thing. Even at DTO, we saw a significant spike in enterprise interest at around that same time. Suddenly large household names, far from what you would consider hip web companies, were interested in DevOps. DevOps had really crossed the chasm and was well on its way into the mainstream at that point. So, why is this history so important? Why do I care so much about the history of DevOps? Well, like the old saying goes, I believe that if you don't know where you're from, you really aren't going to know where you're going. And this history reminds us of a few important things about DevOps. First, it reminds us that DevOps is really from practitioners by practitioners. It's not from a vendor, it's not from analysts. And we've already seen if you're a vendor, you're an analyst, and you try to hijack the message or push things or products or ideas on people who don't want them, the community will just find a way to route around you. Next, it also reminds us that, DevOps, it's not a thing. It's not a product, it's not a spec, it's not a standard, it's not a job title. Other than this collective voice of the community, there really is no one true authority on what DevOps is or isn't. Because really, DevOps is an experience-based movement. It's about practitioners getting together, sharing what works, what doesn't work, and collaborating on making themselves better and helping the companies that they work for. It also reminds us that DevOps is decentralized and open to all. If you have an experience you want to share, or if you have questions for other practitioners, you're always welcome. It's the way this movement started. It's the way it continues on today. So speaking of continuing on, what's been going on with DevOps Days? Well, after those first few events, the whole series has really picked up steam and has been continuing around the world ever since. So, these are community organized, they're free or close to free, and they've been going strong and really become the core. These face-to-face meetings have become the core of the movement and sort of help energize and revitalize it each time one happens. If you really want to hang out with some of the best people on the planet in this space, definitely go to DevOps Days. In fact, there's another one coming up soon in Italy, and there's one after that in Australia, and it's going to kind of march on around the globe. So definitely go to DevOps Days, and if you see this guy, Patrick Dubois, whether it's at DevOps Days or another DevOps-related event, please give him a high five, buy him a beer, tell him thanks. But hey, you don't have to wait for a physical DevOps Days event. 24/7, 365 days of the year, the DevOps conversation carries on online. So jump on in, share what you have, learn from others. So there you have it. That's the history of DevOps as I saw it. There's all kinds of folks and different events that were left off for the sake of time. Hopefully I didn't offend anybody. I was more trying to get the overall concept rather than all the exact contributions. But if you want to get a hold of me, I'm at Damon Edwards on Twitter or damon@dtosolutions.com. As always, thanks for watching.
All right, well now you've seen kind of the history of, I'm not sure why that's like that, but you've seen the history of DevOps and where it came from, and you can see its roots are in Agile, coming from the Agile 2008 conference. And what's interesting is you saw the research done by Gartner that showed the predictions for 2015, and now we're here, and you're starting to hear more and more about DevOps. Also, in August of 2014, Forrester also put out a paper that said, what are the predictions for 2015? So this came out right before fourth quarter of last year, and the words they used were process predictions for application development leaders in 2015 says that DevOps training becomes a cottage industry as Agile scales to the enterprise. So as Agile starts to scale, you start to see challenges beyond just that build and deploy and development aspect of what we do with our Agile teams. So what it means, it says that if we don't address the DevOps issues, our Agile teams aren't going to be effective. So the issues that we're facing in Fortune 100 companies and large-scale Agile enterprises are things like the fact that Agile delivery is incompatible with rigid cost-benefit analysis. It's incompatible with annual funding cycles. So how many here in the room are dealing with annual funding cycles? Well, me. We're all dealing with it. So businesses tend to plan on an annualized basis, which causes challenges. Enterprises and hierarchies are built on command and control and authority. We have to break down those tenets in order to be successful both at Agile and with DevOps. And last but not least, traditional project management philosophies aren't going to carry us forward in continuous delivery. So those are the things we're up against. And do we have it figured out at Nationwide? No, we don't. And we're actually just starting these conversations. So what I'm about to share with you is really hot off the press that we've been sharing with our CIOs at Nationwide and things for you to think about. Again, these are opinions that we're putting on paper in alignment with DevOps and Agile and Lean practices. And many of you are going to walk away with your own opinions about what you should do at your companies as well. So here was the first thing that we were up against. How do we make sense around all these industry practices? So how do we make sense around lean adoption, agile adoption, DevOps adoption, architectural-driven IT? It's confusing. I mean, there are people who are really passionate around the lean towers. There are people who are really passionate around the agile tower. There are people who are really passionate now, today in 2015, around the DevOps towers. And clearly, we have some architects in the room, I believe, who are really passionate around architectural-driven IT. So how do you make sense of it all? So we kind of did a mapping at Nationwide and say, because we're actually using all of these, and saying, well, we have 105 agile teams. We love our Scrum XP, our faster build cycles, the embracing of change. We love our continuous build, our iterative development, working software over time. We love all those things. But we're getting constrained on other ends of the spectrum, from operations on the back end to planning on the front end. And how do we manage that better? From a lean perspective, we have 3 lean initiatives taking place at Nationwide right now, all the way from lean infrastructure to lean app maintenance, and soon lean build. What does that mean to an agile team? Well, we use lean predominantly from a lean management system. So for me, example, I'm not in the code every day like our agile teams, but I still want to work in a lean and agile pattern. So we actually have visual management, we have leader standard work, all of the tenets of lean that you can find as you embrace a culture of lean. And we've read the book by David Mann about how to embrace that culture, and that's really about how leaders engage with their agile teams and how they work the same way that an agile team does through visual management and stand-up and those kind of concepts. And that's really what we're using lean for at Nationwide. We're doing it from a leader perspective for leader engagement. Agile is still at the heart of our development teams. Now, DevOps, where is that coming into play? Well, that's coming in a little bit differently, and we talk about it in the form of continuous delivery. We talk about it in the form of feedback mechanisms and engineering components that we need to have that continuous delivery and reduce variance. All right, so what does this start to look like at Nationwide? Well, the first thing we're trying to do is we're trying to take these concepts, which another word on the street is two-speed IT, bimodal IT, multi-speed IT delivery. How many people have heard of those concepts out there? Yeah, they're out there in the industry as well. And they start to talk about, well, how do you drive differently when you're trying to deliver systems of engagement versus systems of record for optimization? So systems of engagement, you got to deliver fast. For us at Nationwide with financial services and insurance, systems of records are bare. I mean, we have to have very detailed requirements, and we have to have persistent requirements, and we actually go to court to prove that we have those requirements if we have a problem with an insurance policy or a regulation or a financial services product. So there are big differences in how you want to behave when you have speed at play for record-keeping systems or for systems of engagement. So this is the landscape that we're dealing with, is how do we fit all this together? So here's our thinking. So DevOps was really created because it starts to deal with large organizations who have functional towers. So who in your companies, anybody's company have functional towers? And I'll give you a concept of a tower. We built our IT delivery model at Nationwide based on 3 towers: plan, build, and run. Those towers rarely talk, or when they do talk, they're not sure what the other one's doing, so they don't understand what each tower needs from each other. And this is at the heart of what DevOps is trying to solve. So you've seen we've drawn a circle around that and says we need to shift from vertical practices to horizontal improvement. DevOps is a set of practices and mechanisms that can facilitate that continuous delivery and reduce variance across that delivery spectrum. And it can start to break down the barriers within those towers, and that's our thinking today. And are we out of the woods yet? No, we're not. We still have a lot to do to implement. If you wanted to say, how do you implement a DevOps model? We'll talk about that later, but we have a lot of work to do here to move to this horizontal mindset as we move forward. So here's a slide that I want to share with you just on how we evolved at Nationwide. Many of you probably evolved the same way in your own companies, but circa 2000, these are our business units over here, and we basically had no standard methodology at all at Nationwide. Well, the first thing we did is we created one around 2000, and it was very waterfall centric. And guess what? That was great, because the first thing we needed to do was drive consistency. Less about agility back in the day, but more about consistency before the Manifesto and before Agile came on the scene. And so that's what we did. Well, actually started in about 2008, we started paying real close attention to Agile. We had small Agile teams forming across the enterprise, and we wanted to collect them up and decide, well, how do we get better at Agile, and how do we get our teams to be more fluid in Agile development across the breadth of our organization? And that's how the role I have today was created, to create a development center. And we did create a development center. We've been growing it ever since. So basically what happened was we created a concept of one IT. So yeah, we needed to do some centralization, but we also needed to introduce Agile as the primary concept by which we wanted to deliver back in that 2008 through 2010 timeframe. But what you'll notice in this aligned enterprise Agile build is we were still only dealing with that center tower, which was build. We were not dealing with the plan side of the house, and we were not dealing with the run side of the house. So we got really good with 105 teams now, over 100 teams. I don't know that the 105 is exact anymore, but it's over 100 teams that basically are doing Agile development. And we got really good at that. But the reality of the situation is it's still a little bit what I call water scrumfall. So there's an element of water scrumfall that exists because of that planning on the front end that's disconnected from the build, and the deployment on the back end that's also a little bit disconnected from the build. So what do we envision for the future? So this is where we start to use DevOps to move to continuous delivery. How do we start to connect the dots from that plan side to that deployment side with those great Agile practices that we've introduced in our Dev Center today? So here's what happened. Our focus on Agile adoption clearly optimized the middle. I mean, we're driving great value through the enterprise, and I'll show you some of that value later, but we now need to eliminate some of the wait states on the ends that drive continuous flow. So you can see on that graph up there in the middle, we have high acceleration during design, develop, and acceptance testing, and we can do great build. But we run into situations where we have clear starvation of our lines. We have backlog issues. We have backlog health issues. We don't have continuous flow. So we could end up with what I call bursts of energy. So we'll burst through an Agile development practice, and then we'll starve for a while because we're waiting on planning. Same thing on the back end. We have a very antitrust model on the back end that we need to break down. So when you think of automated deployment, and you think of how do you move code to production, you want to be like the Googles and the Facebooks. Gene Kim is a great author of the Phoenix Project around DevOps, and he calls companies either unicorns or horses. Unicorns are the Googles, the .coms, the Facebooks. Horses are the Nationwides, the Chase Banks, the big transactional engines of the industry. And horses and unicorns can behave differently. Unicorns can behave where they can do 100 deployments a day. Let me be clear, Nationwide cannot do 100 deployments a day to production. We can do 100 builds a day. We can do 100 internal deployments for integrated testing purposes, but we cannot do 100 releases to our agents every day. That would cause a lot of challenges in our business model. But that doesn't mean we can't still embark on a DevOps model and understand how to get to that rapid build, rapid deployment, so that at any moment, especially for those systems of engagement, we can do that for certain things. On our systems of engagement on the internet, we can actually do more deployments, and we could be faster at that. Our systems of record is what slows us down of how fast we can release new products and new capability to the agent market. So you can see we have a hump in the middle. We've optimized in the middle, but we haven't optimized the whole. So where else have we seen maturity? So again, this was a study that was done on Nationwide that says, well, where have you made progress? And clearly, again, in that dev test, we've moved from inefficient to leaner and smarter through our Agile practices. We're pretty darn good in that middle. But when it comes to steering, which is where you set up your projects and where you get your funding and where you start to build that backlog, we struggle a little bit. We don't have continuous flow there. When you see on the back end where you see the deploy and operate, we need to move to a trusted model. So we have a system that was baked many years ago. We call it the 4-2-1 model. And basically what it means is because of lack of trust, we push to deployment to our data centers, and we wait. And we wait, and we call it the freeze period. And nobody can change anything during the freeze period. I mean, what's happening at that point? I mean, is we watching code harden and freeze? I'm not really sure what's happening. But that's our model, and that's what we're on a mission to figure out with DevOps is how do we move out of that? How do we move to a trusted model? What I would tell you, it's not that we don't have the tools to push the button to get to deployment faster, it's the antitrust model. It's we can push the button, but we're so unsure that it's really ready that we do a lot of manual validation during that freeze period to make sure it's ready to go. And that's what we have to break down on the back end to say we can move to a trusted model. And the way you can move there is through trusted automation and investments in automation, like automated regression testing. And that's one of the TDD Agile practices. How do you get test-driven development through the life cycle and trust it through automated regression? And those are the concepts that we've embraced. And then here's kind of a visual we put together that says, how do we build a DevOps delivery highway? It's the same kind of picture. So how do we steer better? How do we dev and test, in the middle? We do that really well. But then how do we deploy? And how do we eliminate those wait states in between so that we can enable that faster speed and continuous delivery to ultimately give value to the business? This is on the back end. This is some of the things I talked about that says how do you move that back end out of that freeze period and actually get to a continuous pipeline so that that once tests are passed, code can be moved to successive environments and we can trust that the automation's working without going through manual validation. These are the paths and the missions that we're on at Nationwide, and clearly we're not there yet, but this is what we're trying to get to. So here's kind of our concept of the things we need to focus on to drive that continuous delivery pipeline. So I mentioned a couple times, consistency and automation. So clearly I think we have great Agile dev practices at Nationwide, and we have an Agile mindset. And in our dev teams, in the 100 teams we have, we want to continue to invigorate that, and we want to continue to build that. But we do need more visibility in things like release planning at the front end. We can release an iteration plan in a team, but if we can't get the business aligned around what a release is and how to stack up the work, again, we go through starvation. Automated builds and deploys on the back end, moving that trusted model, and then automated infrastructure. So we're moving to how do you provision infrastructure in an automated fashion as well through some cloud-based environments. So we do cloud-based Java hosting for our dev teams so that they can provision dev environments faster. The other big one is really how do we shift left the value proposition? How do we get those Agile concepts into the steer phases? We have a concept called iterative solution scoping. So what we're trying to do is our culture with our business partners has often grown up in we got to know everything before we can have our Agile team start. Well, that in and of itself is anti-Agile. But that's where the water scrum fall comes into that. But it's a trust model again. If you want to do evolutionary requirements in an Agile way, which we are now coining iterative solution scoping because that aligns with our methodology, we want to scope on an iterative fashion. And we want to get iterations of work fed to our Agile teams faster. That requires a lot of trust because one, you have to trust that I want to invest, I'm willing to invest, and I'm willing to take risks because I don't know all the answers up front, which is at the heart of what we believe in Agile. No one ever knows all the answers up front in a waterfall model. You think you get fooled into knowing, but you don't know. So why continue that belief even on the front end as you're steering and as you're funding? So those are the shift left value propositions that we want to focus on. Next is, this is a tough one. So move to a product-centric mindset from a project-centric mindset. We've grown up culturally at Nationwide in a project-centric mindset. We need to be thinking product. We are asset owners at our heart. We have large systems through the internet and through record keeping and policy administration systems, and those need to be nurtured, maintained, enhanced, extended. That's what we do for the most part. We build new cool stuff a lot, but we also have other systems that live with us for long periods of time. And we need to get those on good release cadences versus having 10 projects hit a single team who's then trying to work backwards with 10 different projects around a single release. Because at the end of the day, guys, it's one piece of software, right? We got to deploy the code to production. And whether that code is supporting 5 projects or 1 project, it's still the code. So moving to that product-centric mindset out of a project-centric mindset, it's tough for a lot of organizations, and it's tough for a lot of IT professionals as well. I think visibility metrics is a good one. I mean, Agile's rooted in big visible charts, Lean's grounded in visual management systems. But where we lack visibility, again, it's on that steer side and on that deployment side. So how can we gain more visibility into things like feature bundling, release planning, and then how do we get more visibility and ready to deploy practices? And there's great tools out there that we're looking at that can help you actually get that visibility. I wanted to give you some insight. So, learned everything I know from DevOps for Dummies. So, the funny story I have is my CIO was intrigued by DevOps. And he says, hey, Steve, he said, you can get me some information. So I go into his office. I said, I'm going to give you this book, but I have to tell you, I feel really bad giving you a dummies book because, you are the CIO of the company. So don't shoot me, but here's a DevOps for Dummies book. I'm not calling you a dummy, but here's your DevOps for Dummies book. But we did, so Sanjeev Sharma, who's the author of this book, came into Nationwide, and we actually did a workshop for a day. And it was rather enlightening because we looked at the end-to-end flow across our steer, our build, and our deploy, and we said, what are the things that need to change? What are the bottlenecks that we have? We had a lot of people in the room, and I'm not going to read all these words on the paper, but it was, enlightening. Things like you see, these are the scribble marks on the board that says, non-functionals just don't get elicited all that well, non-functional requirements. Things as simple as, we have estimates that are way too broad coming out of steering that hit our Agile teams. Release orientation, you see up that. We've got to move out of that project-centric mindset to a release-oriented view. So this day workshop, basically gave us insight to where we should focus. I wanted to give you some insight. So just by attacking the center of the build, we've made great strides. So, I say that driving results with a DevOps focus, but really it's our Agile adoption that created these benefits. And if we can actually take that to the next step with a DevOps focus to drive breadth of benefits coming out of steer and deploy, I think we'll even get better results in our quality and our productivity. So you can see we've really increased our quality, dropped the number of defects we're throwing. Most of our software releases go in 0 defect unless we make conscious decisions not to with the business. Our availability over the last 5 years has increased dramatically. Our delivery and on-time delivery, and again, I'm talking, this is mostly through our Agile practices, but what I have high hopes for is that we can broaden that spectrum and get even better if we embrace a wider DevOps model. All right, so here are the things that we're thinking about. And, first of all, is lean initiatives. So these are fairly new in the last year for us, which basically says how are leaders going to interact with our Agile teams? And how do we introduce lean concepts of visual management and leader interaction and leader standard work? We're doing that right now. Expanded Agile adoption and practices. We still have a subset of development in our company that's still not quite there. But we have 105 Agile teams, but we still have others that are still working in more of a waterfall mindset that we need to move forward. We're making heavy investments in test automation. So, we do basically, our Agile teams know that part of our standard work is we believe in automation. We believe in test-driven development, and we're going to basically push the envelope on making sure we focus on that automation on the front end. And that's been a cultural shift for us. The cultural shift is wow, I don't want to pay for that because my project's going to go over budget. But it really is a pay me now or pay me later scenario. And we saw great benefits out of it as, we do a lot of things that we have to deploy once and then we repeat state after state based on the regulations and the filings that take place for our insurance products. So, when you do that way, you have to be able to regression test repeatedly to get things to market. And you can't afford to be doing that all on a manual basis. Continuous requirements, I talked about this, but there were two aspects of that. So iteratively and evolving your requirements along the way and convincing your business that they'll be safe and that they can trust us to iterate through those requirements is a key. The other aspect is the user experience. We used to have a pretty waterfall-centric mindset around user experience as well. but through all of the mobile devices and responsive design capability, we come to the realization we need to embed the UX experience into the Agile teams. And that's something we've done in the last year. Integrated release planning, we've talked a lot about that. Environment orchestration and infrastructure automation. You know, that gets us a long way if we can commission environments quickly for our development teams to spin up work and then move quickly on the back end from a deployment perspective. I wanted to leave you, kind of my last two slides with some insights, so you should be able to get these, but these are some papers that I've been reading and that we're kind of anchoring to at Nationwide, which is, I mentioned the Forrester Insight Report. I've talked about the 2014 State of DevOps report, the DevOps for Dummies report, Creating a Lean Culture by David Mann, and then I've mentioned Gene Kim, who has a blog on a regular basis around what does DevOps really mean. And he actually runs a summit in the fall of every year called the DevOps Summit. He invites in companies from around the country to talk about how are they evolving and adopting DevOps. So just some good material for you. So I'm going to pause, see if you guys have any questions. Say thank you. Yeah.
You mentioned continuous deployments as one of your initiatives, current initiatives. Does that mean that you have, apart from your Agile team, you actually have deployments gathering that goes on a continuous basis that's expected to continuously feed your Agile teams mature backlog this year?
Right. So the question was the requirements, the continuous flow of requirements, and the question was, so how, did you guys evolve out of more that waterfall mindset around how do you scope things to now how do we get more iteratively involved? And so the answer is absolutely, in two forms. So first on the business side. So the business side has to be, they have to want to play in making sure we can chunk up the work the right way and evolve that into backlog for Agile teams. That's not traditionally been a strength of ours, and it comes from the annual funding cycle that we have. So we're getting better at it. I mean, we had a couple speakers here from another part of Nationwide that talked about visible requirements, I think. They may have talked about this concept of iterative solution scoping, but I look at that as a DevOps move because it starts to get you that continuous flow. So you don't have that starvation in your Agile teams. And we literally have Agile teams that, you look at the backlog and it's like, okay, I did everything great, I delivered, but now I'm waiting on the next set of work. And we've got to make sure that next set of work is continuously flowing.
So what would, follow-up question, what would be the, so what would be the threshold like? Because on a mature Agile team, and the capacity of the Agile team is say 100 story points for an iteration, do you typically have like a threshold of, we should have 4 iterations of work developed? Because if you have a lot of requirements, then you go into a waterfall mode at that point. So what's kind of the threshold?
Our threshold is, so I know I have some of my teams, 2 iterations of work we want in our backlog. So we'd love to see 2 iterations of work in our backlog. But honestly, for me, the seat I sit in, I need to see more than just 2 iterations. I need to know that my Agile teams aren't going to starve in 4 weeks because we're running 2-week iterations. I need to know that the business is stacking up the work to come in behind that. So one of the things we're looking at is how do you create backlog health metrics, and how do you create requirements metrics so you can measure that and say, okay, great, we got 2 iterations worth of requirements for the team. The team's feeling healthy, but is the system of continuous flow really healthy? And you only know that by knowing, well, what's coming next in the pipeline, and is it real? Versus, I'm going to get into a really bad valley in 4 iterations, and I'm going to have a lot of bench time of my Agile teams because they're going to end up starving for backlog. It might take a month, 2 months, 3 months to get to that point, but it does happen if you don't have that continuous flow.
So can you talk a little bit about how you've dealt with the regulatory constraints? As somebody else in the insurance industry, we are just getting hammered by audit as we try and move in an Agile direction. That we didn't do this, we didn't satisfy this requirement. When the reality is we're meeting some of the needs of the requirement, just not in the same way that a traditional waterfall project or project portfolio would do so. Can you talk about your experiences navigating that change?
Yeah, I think, and that links to, I didn't mention that we are actually a CMMI 3 rated Agile environment. So we've been CMMI 3 certified for now really the last 6 years. You get your certification every 3 years. Well, one, that helps the regulators and auditors understand that, even in Agile, we can become CMMI certified. And the way we do that is we have guidelines and principles that we call standard work. And as long as the auditors can validate that Agile teams know about the standard work and know what those guidelines are, and that then they know that we're healthy. So again, I always like to say guidelines because if you get, you don't want to get to rigid Agile. You don't want to get standards that start to defeat the purpose of agility. You want to have guidelines that help guide teams, especially when you're dealing with 105 teams. And in in our world, in our dev center, we've gone from 26 teams to like 60. A couple years ago, we had 26 and we spun up to 60 like within a year. Well, you can't do that if you don't have some kind of guiding principles and guidelines. And we had that because it fell under that CMMI 3 umbrella. So it helps us a lot that we have those certifications and we focus on that.
Yeah, I think you even I heard an example from there where the test-driven development was even considered better than a tech review of the code from a CMMI level 3 assessment perspective. So there are controls you can correlate to Agile practices, but you have to do a good job of documenting and explaining them, and there has to be certainly knowledge within your team, because that's what auditors pick up on, as you know, fairly quickly.
The funny thing too is like if you really, really anchor to Agile with that Agile mindset and you say it's all about transparency. Well, guess what we did? We invited all the auditors in, we gave them a tour, we showed them everything we do. People are like, well, how would you do that? Why are you showing the auditors? Nobody invites the auditors in unless you're getting an audit. Well, yeah, you got to invite them in. Because then, one, just like a show and tell, you're going to get their feedback and they're going to say, I'm uncomfortable here. Could you maybe put some guidelines in place that helps me get comfortable? And then we do that. And then the teams would know that. But it was a really healthy conversation with the auditors when we actually did a gimbal walk and a show and tell with the auditing vice president and the auditing leadership team to say, this is what we're embarking on.
Another question?
Steve, as you push out into the DevOps to the delivery side, the deployment, what kind of criteria are you using for, you've got a ton of products. What are you using as criteria to determine which ones you're going to test the waters with first?
As far as, you're talking insurance products or just products as is IT assets?
IT assets.
Yeah, we have this concept of application owners, and what I'd say is, they have to make the call in partnership with their business partner about the timing of what can go to the street when, because, some things, we have actually one team, one of my leaders is in here and we're working with a team that has what they call a test and learn environment. And, they want to get there rapidly in a small subset, learn from it, and then get there rapidly before they expand. And that's great for that team. Another team who might be dealing with agency operations or with a large retirement plan business, they're going to want to get there in a little bit more structured way because of the communication and education they need to send out with the release. But that still doesn't mean we can't do rapid builds and continuous build and rapid deploys behind the four walls of IT before we actually release it to production. So yeah, I think it's that balance. That's actually that was one of the great conversations I had with our CIO, which was, just everyone trying to get their head around, well, we're never going to be a Google. We can't deploy to production 200 times a day or 1,000 times a day. And there is realism in that for banks and financial institutions and insurance companies. But it doesn't mean you still can't build fast, repeatedly, and deploy fast, and regression test fast, and get yourself ready. If you take us, my vision would be take IT out of the bottleneck equation. Get us to a point where we can build, deploy, and be ready for release fast, and then the business can make the right decisions. I would say historically, 10 years ago, we didn't even give them the right to make the decision because we couldn't even get there fast enough.
Along the same lines, have you found any, I mean, you have a wide array of assets, right, on a wide range of technology platforms. Have you found any significant roadblocks based on your technology platforms and your ability to migrate to DevOps? Or there's some sort of stuff that's, hey, it's not necessarily off limits, it's just we technically haven't been able to figure out how to get that into a model that will work within DevOps, or even continuous deployment, or even one-click deployment, continuous integration, those type of.
I mean, I think, all technology domains, so if you go to our nationwide booth out here, you'll see a flyer that says we work in 17 plus technology domains. So we do everything from web-based development to large-scale Java record-keeping systems to even, we still have a contingent of large-scale legacy COBOL applications. And guess what? The world is growing in our big data Hadoop environments, and we're growing in things like packaged applications. So we're on big package applications like Guidewire and Salesforce.com. Well, we never go into it that says the tech domain is going to drive our ability to be agile. We go into it and say, let's wrap our agile capabilities around a tech domain, and we'll figure out a build model for that tech domain. So the one we're embarking on right now is Salesforce. We're figuring out what it means to build in the cloud with the Salesforce package solution in an agile pattern, and what that looks like. And we actually produce, a Salesforce build model. We keep maturing that and keep figuring it out. So yeah, tech domain, I'm sure it throws us for a loop, but I think we're pretty good at it now. I mean, we can look at all these different tech domains and figure it out.
I mainly wanted to ask you for that answer alone. I think there's a lot of folks out there. You guys have such a wide range of technology. Some people will say, I can't do it on this, I can't do it on that. It's nice to hear that, that's not being the limiter just out of the gate, Any questions?
All right, well, anything else? Ben, thank you very much, and Bart, thank you guys. Right. Oh, you're going to ask me a question?
So I totally get the front end. Let's create continuous flow. Let's create a different pattern for how that front end behaves. The plan. I'm curious from a tactical. Here's what we need to change. Are there 2 or 3 really big lever things that you are seeking to change in terms of behavior, in terms of structure, that enables that to start happening?
Yeah, I think it's anchored here. I mean, if you said, what are you putting your bets on? I'd say, number one, more automation. My fuzzy math would tell me, based on the number of people and contractors and level of automation we're doing, we might be spending $50 million a year in pounding automation to wrap around these assets. The other one is getting requirements, so that UX integration was real. We needed to get the user experience team. That was real. We built a UX integration model, gave it to all our teams and said, this is how we want to do business. And I don't know how many people, maybe your UX team's not part of your IT department, but that is the case at Nationwide. Our UX department is part of marketing. So we had to forge a relationship with marketing to say, how do we do UX integration with our Agile teams? So that we can actually have them embedded in the teams to be part of our iterative cycles, to be part of our show and tells, and bump and roll with the experience, no different than we bump and roll with the rest of the software. So that's a big one, Ben. Probably the other one, I would, it's been slow for us to get to truly release orientation and that product-centric mindset. I think that's a longer journey for us. But I do think, the scoping, the automation, those are the big ones for us.
Any other questions for Steve? Let's give Steve a hand.
All right, thanks, Steve.
Okay, before you all disperse, I want to call Dan up here. He is the head of the Columbus DevOps Meetup. It is a growing community, so I just want to say a couple words about it.
Hello, everyone. Steve, thanks. I'm really glad that you showed that video on the history of where the DevOps term came from. So we are organizing a local DevOps meetup. If you go to meetup.com and search for DevOps Columbus, we're on there. Really like to encourage everybody to attend our meetups. We have a meetup on the second Tuesday of every month, and we tend to move around to different locations. that gives people that live in suburbs or things a good opportunity to come if it's convenient on that particular month. So we've got a lot of really interesting speakers, a lot of really interesting topics. We talk a lot about open source technologies and new tools that you might not otherwise get a chance to see. So just want to invite everybody to come out and join us and be part of the local DevOps movement. Thanks.
Thank you, David. All right, and then maybe we can get a DevOps day to show up in Columbus maybe in the fall. What do you think?
I don't know. We'll see.
All right. Anyhow, thanks again, Steve. Really appreciate it. I hope you all have a great rest of the afternoon.